This week on the Writers Detective Bureau, body wires, New York State Troopers, and getting your own DNA tested. I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau. Sweet 16. Welcome to episode number 16 of the Writers Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality crime-related fiction. Recently, Joanna Penn was talking about Patreon on the Creative Penn podcast. She said, "I think patronage is one of the most powerful things that you can do to support creators that you want to continue hearing from. It's one of those ways that you can support people and encourage them to do the things that are either useful to you or just putting good stuff in the world. Regardless of whether you support me on Patreon, I absolutely think you, as a creator of stories, should look into setting up your own Patreon account. You can learn more at writersdetective.com/Patreon. Patreon. And thanks to my patrons, Joan Raymond, Guy Alton, Natasha Badgema, Natalie Borelli, Joe Trent, Siobhan Pope, Leah Cutter, and the most recent patron, Ryan Kinmill, for helping me keep the lights on in the Bureau. You can find links to their author websites in the show notes by going to writersdetective.com/16. This week's first question comes from Libby Doyle, and you can find her author website at libbydoyle.com. Libby asks, what kind of equipment does the FBI and other law enforcement use now to monitor undercover operations? Would an agent still be wired, as they used to say, or has new technology made this expression obsolete? Thank you. Well, you're very welcome, Libby. Thank you for the question. This is one of those questions that is a little bit hard for me to answer because if I give too much information, it could certainly jeopardize the actual undercover agents and detectives that are currently working out in the field. I will say that wires, body wires in particular, are still used. Now, what a body wire is if you think of a digital recorder, like an Olympus digital recorder that you would buy at the electronics store, it works very much like that, where nowadays it digitally records the audio through a microphone as to what's going on around the person that's wearing it. And this is where the wire term comes in, besides being a digital recorder, is that it also broadcasts that signal to whoever is handling that undercover operator. So it is essentially both a radio as well as a recorder. Now, there could be recording going on at the receiving end of that signal, but modern ones will digitally record on the device itself. So that way, if the receiver loses signal back in the van, if you will, where the monitoring is going on, the recording will still be preserved on the device itself. Now, it's very important that the monitor in the vehicle or wherever they're doing this listening post from be able to hear that in a real-time situation, because they are queuing off of what's going on as to whether that agent needs some sort of rescue. So yes, those are still vitally important. Whether they're using a physical body wire like you would see in the old movies where it's shoved into a boot or taped around their leg, that really depends. It depends on how much money the agency has, whether they're using old equipment or if they've updated their equipment to more modern digital stuff. Now, I obviously don't want to get into very specific detail for the original reason that I mentioned, for security reasons, but this is one of those things where if you can dream it from a technological perspective with a creative way to solve this problem, to make it more of a modern take on this, you would certainly be able to use your literary license and come up with that, whether that's a iPhone app or something along those lines. I don't think anyone's going to fault you for that. But as long as undercover investigations are still continuing, there will definitely be a need for the rescue team to have live monitoring of what that undercover operator is doing. And that could be either an undercover FBI agent like Libby asked about, a local law enforcement officer, or it could be an informant. So Libby, new technology has not made that expression obsolete. We still refer to them as wires or body wires. And the reason we say body wire is so it doesn't get confused with a wiretap, because we'll still call a wiretap where we're listening to telephones. We'll refer to that as a wire as well, even though it's technically a communications intercept. So if we're using the term wire interchangeably between the two, if you're trying to differentiate between, let's say you're running an informant that is wearing a body wire while you're part of a surveillance on a wiretap investigation, saying body wire is a quick way to differentiate that information from, in a slang kind of way, from the wiretap telephone investigation. So I'm sorry I wasn't comfortable enough to give you a more definite answer. So go ahead and use that artistic license. Thanks again for the question, Libby. Again, you can find Libby at libbydoyle.com. And the link to Libby's website will also be in the show notes at writersdetective.com/16. This week's next question comes from Tom Erb, who you can find at tomerb.com. Again, his link will be in the show notes. Tom writes, "Hello, I really enjoy your informative and entertaining podcast. Keep them coming." Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. Here's my question. In my novel, I want the main protagonist to be a New York State Trooper criminal investigator involved in a series of missing women. One found dead in a field. When would local authorities allow or bring in the troopers? Above the Wayne County Sheriff's Department? Or wouldn't they call them in at all? I know it's a jurisdiction thing, but with the small rural farming county that this story is set in, I'm guessing funding might play a role as well. I hope my question makes sense. Thanks so much, and I look forward to the next podcast. Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate the kudos. Now, I looked at the Wayne County Sheriff's Department website, and I also looked at the New York State Trooper website. Now, for other listeners who are not necessarily writing about New York, I do have a research tip for you. Many of these, or most of these agencies, and both the New York State website as well as the Wayne County Sheriff's Department website, both had this. But there is usually a document that's created once a year, and it's a yearly report for the agency. And it will have statistics, and it will talk about the special units that the departments have. It's kind of a transparency thing to show that they're still doing their job. A lot of times it highlights the great work that those agencies do. And in this case, it was some pretty good insight into the types of calls and the volume of calls that Wayne County Sheriff's Department handles. And then also it shows what cases the New York State troopers get involved in when it comes to criminal investigation. So New York State troopers have what they call BCI. I'm assuming that's Bureau of Criminal Investigation, which are their plainclothes suit and tie detectives. They also have a number of other very specialized units for crime scene evidence collection, computer forensics, an underwater dive team, an aviation unit, all of those different things. And one thing I did notice was in the either 2016 or 2017 report for Wayne County Sheriff's Department, their annual report, there were not any homicide investigations. I think somewhere there was a mention about a homicide investigation from a previous year, as far as cases that were still being investigated or handled or something along those lines. But it certainly tells me that, first of all, Wayne County sounds like a great place to live because it's a very low crime rate in comparison to the rest of New York. But the call volume and the amount of cases, and certainly the budget is listed there as well. Now, the budget for, I want to say it was 2017 for Wayne County, showed about $7 million being used for the patrol side of things. The Sheriff's Department also pays for corrections, which was another $8 million, I think, like something along those lines. But in the grand scheme of things, $7 million is not a lot of money when you're talking about paying for everything. Those are retirement benefits. Those are salaries. Those are police cars. That is gas at $5 a gallon. So all of those things considered, yes, I think budget would definitely be a major issue for Wayne County, especially when that turns into a series of missing women. And then more importantly, in looking at the New York State Trooper annual report, I could see that they had worked major homicide investigations showing that they're doing this kind of work in addition to what the local authorities are doing. There was also a investigations main web page on the New York State Trooper website that talked about their role in helping local authorities with major cases like this. So I think, Tom, your setup of having the New York State Troopers come in to assist Wayne County is a really viable and great idea. You may or may not have the FBI get involved when it becomes a series of missing women. Obviously, that's something you as the author get to decide whether that's going to be the case. There can be the issue of too many cooks in the kitchen, but if this is something that gets up and running as far as an investigation and the New York State Troopers or the Wayne County Sheriff's Department feel like they have a pretty good handle on it, they don't necessarily have to call in the FBI for help, especially when it comes to the resources that the New York State Troopers bring to the table with regard to manpower for evidence collection and the far-reaching aspects of criminal investigation, of having enough investigators to follow up on all these leads. And the one thing I did notice is that Wayne County falls within Troop E, like Edward or Echo, for the New York State Trooper jurisdiction. So just from reading the website, it looks like there are BCI, the New York State Trooper BCI, Bureau of Criminal Investigations, detectives assigned to each troop. I would imagine it's barracks. So you may have your character. I'm not sure if there's an overall BCI headquarters somewhere, or if this would simply be assigned to the BCI detective at Troop E. So you can do a little more research in that regard. And then also in that annual report for both of them, there are definitely some contact emails and phone numbers of real people, lieutenants in charge of the actual investigative units. And it can't hurt to reach out to someone at the agencies that you're writing about to see if they'd be willing to help you with your novel. Now, I know a lot of you, when I made that last suggestion, are probably thinking, ooh, I don't know that I want to do that. And right now, I'm not a big self-help kind of guy, but I do have an Audible account, and I'm currently listening to Mel Robbins' 5-Second Rule. And any author that is trying to get out of his or her own way, try to motivate to either get your writing done every day or make these calls that are a little bit out of your comfort zone, I really suggest listening to it on audiobook, because Mel has a great voice. And despite being a former public defender, I'm only teasing, well, she was a public defender, but I'm teasing about any kind of animosity there. It is a great book. And in fact, it actually led me to the idea of possibly putting out a holiday list of a buyer's guide for writers, something that you can kind of leave on the table for your loved ones to pick up and get some gift ideas for you of things you guys might actually like. Or if you're listening to this knowing that there's somebody else in the family or a friend in your writer's club that might benefit from this. It's something I'm working on that may be coming out here in the next few weeks. But going back to the Mel Robbins book, The 5-Second Rule, I'm not going to, obviously, it's the 5-second rule. I mean, we know what it's like when a piece of toast falls on the floor. You blow it off in 5 seconds or less, you're good to go. It's the same thing. Right now, I'm giving you that suggestion that you should pick up the phone or you should open that email window and make that ask. Reach out to somebody and see what you can do to make that connection. But if you don't ask, it is still a no. So get out of your own way, make that call or send that email and try to get help. Try to make those connections. And, it's a numbers game. Yeah, you may not get the help that you're looking for that first time or that second time or that third time. But you know what? You're going to connect with somebody eventually that's going to be able to help you, because there are a lot of people who want to see you succeed. And of course, that's what this podcast is all about. So at the very least, go ahead and send that question, just like Tom did. Send that question to me at writersdetective.com/podcast. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Do it. Send that email, whether that's to me or to somebody at the agency that you're writing about. and make that ask happen. Thank you so much for the question, Tom. Again, you can find Tom and his stories at tomerb.com. Our next question comes from Miss R. Reed, who you can find on Amazon and Goodreads. She's the author of She Too and Energy Fix. Miss Reed writes, are folks flocking to or from the 23andMe or Ancestry.com kits for DNA? I want to do mine, but know that my sibling could be caught if a family member runs DNA through the site. Not that I care all that much. I'd love for every criminal to be caught and brought to justice, but thought that would be a great topic for discussion on the podcast. I got kits for my entire family for this Christmas. Great question. In fact, we just did the same thing with the Ancestry DNA as well. We're going to do a New Year's Eve party where we reveal with a bunch of friends what our DNA results are, and maybe even have everyone guess as to what whose DNA results correspond to whom. I think there are quite a few people that are flocking to it. The key thing to understand with the way law enforcement used the DNA, in particular for the Golden State Killer, it wasn't through 23andMe or Ancestry.com. It was a project that was open source where people take their results from 23andMe or Ancestry.com and then upload them to an open source website where they are seeking results. So by running your DNA through 23andMe or Ancestry, you're not participating in that open source website. You would physically, on your own, decide to do that, taking your results and uploading them to one of those open source Ancestry projects and seek results that way. Now, it was a pretty creative move on the investigative team to do that, to solve this long time cold case with the Golden State Killer. I would be willing to bet that case law will result from this or from subsequent investigations that try to do something similar. The real question will be whether in the future law enforcement can get any kind of court order that forces companies like Ancestry or 23andMe to compare DNA results against their database. I would imagine there will be case law that addresses this in the very near future. We're certainly getting into that Gattaca, Big Brother DNA world as we all start to unlock our own DNA or learn about our own DNA. But just by participating in 23andMe or Ancestry.com currently does not mean that someone in your family is going to be found out for some sort of crime. Now, you can, from doing my own kit through Ancestry.com, that was the one that we chose, you can opt in or opt out on being contacted by other people that are looking for family members. So I think this is one of those watch this space kind of things when it comes to the court and what they're going to allow law enforcement to do in the future when it comes to checking DNA against public DNA databases. But as far as 23andMe and Ancestry.com, I don't see running your DNA through them being an issue. Now, the next question will be on the private sector side. I'm more concerned personally. Now, I'm sure there's a little bit of a conspiracy mindset to this, but it's one thing to have the Constitution restrict what law enforcement can do. It's quite another when it comes to that really long end user agreement or licensing agreement that we all agree to when we use these things, just like your phone, whether the information in the DNA database will be shared with other companies. And my biggest fear in the future is that my DNA results will be shared with, say, a health insurance company or a life insurance company where these companies know things about me that I don't even know. So if I'm at risk to some sort of disease that, may not even be identified yet, but let's say 20 years in the future, they determine there's a genome that indicates a higher likelihood for a type of cancer or Alzheimer's or something along those lines, I don't want my DNA results, unbeknownst to me, being released to an insurance company that then uses that as a reason to deny me some sort of coverage. So I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but I'm just planting that seed. Who knows? That might make for a good story or a good book. But as it stands right now, there are millions of people flocking to learning their DNA results. And thank you so much for the question. And again, you can find our read on Goodreads or on Amazon, and links to her pages will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Writers Detective Bureau podcast. Get the show notes at writersdetective.com/16 and send off that question, whether that's to me or to someone you are making a connection with for the first time. Just go ahead and do it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, send it.